Hello, Starshine. My name is Liz and this is my channel, Simsational Stories. If you have not seen my videos before and you enjoy this one, please like and subscribe. And maybe check out my other social media as well. I'm on both Facebook and Twitter. All relevant links are in the description below. And of course, if you're a Sims player and you'd like to download any of my characters, just search the hashtag Simsational Stories on the Sims 4 gallery. All original content is created by This Is Not Eric. Finally, before I begin my Simsational story, I'd like to issue this blanket content and trigger warning. The following story is just Sims, hey. I'm not going to apologise for treating them terribly, if that's what I've done. But I do want to assure you now that although I mean absolutely no harm, I completely understand if you feel unable to consume my content. Many loves, and we will catch each other on the internet elsewhere. Okay, so now we've gotten that over with. Let's go. Today's story is from Blanchard the Bachelor, and we're at chapter 5. If you have not seen previous chapters and would like to catch up, there are playlists available on my channel so you can hear the entire story in chronological order. The rest of us are going to move on from where we left off last time though. So without further ado. After having left his pregnant wife and young son behind in the sleepy suburbs of Willow Creek, Blanchard Bridges lives alone in a little beautiful bachelor pad in Evergreen Harbour, which he decorated all by himself with his bartending wages. Here he felt more free than he had in years. That was until he got the news that his ex-wife Greta was dead, and social services were trying to get a hold of him to see if he would be able to take custody of his children again. Octavian was a teenager now, and Roxanne, whom Blanchard had never even met, was a toddler. The idea of becoming their parent again was a horrifying concept. Not half as horrifying as the reality Blanchard's teenage son Octavian was currently living. He had come home from school and found his mother lying dead on the lounge room floor while his baby sister screamed beside her corpse. He had no idea how long they'd been like that, and somehow, at just 16 years old, Octavian was having to figure it all out on his own. Social services had had no luck contacting his father, and their caseworker was talking about foster homes and adoption for Roxanne. Octavian didn't want that. He'd probably never see his little sister again if that happened. Their mother, Greta, wouldn't have wanted that for them. He had to find his father. To be fair, Blanchard wasn't really hiding. It was just that Willow Creek wasn't exactly right next door to Evergreen Harbour, and Blanchard was busy trying not to think about Greta, her death, or their children. Obviously, social services were involved if they were trying to call him, and if he just didn't answer, it would all go away eventually. Octavian wasn't letting his father off that easily though, and managed to track the bastard down. Blanchard was being ridiculously cowardly, trying to avoid the authorities, and downright callous towards his children to boot. He had already left them once before. How could he do this to them again? Their mother was dead. Blanchard was all the family they had left in this world. Didn't that mean anything to him? It did not. Blanchard was just starting to find himself. He'd been so young when he and Greta had met and married, which he'd only done because she was pregnant anyway. He'd never wanted to live that life and be a suburban father and a husband. And that's why he had left. He lived free in the city now, and he refused to give that up. Octavian was left in the exact same precarious position he'd been in before going to find his father, if not worse off, because Now he had no hope of anyone else coming to help him through this. He was going to have to do it all alone, and the social worker had warned him that it wouldn't be easy. Having to explain to little Roxanne that she might not be able to stay with him was a heartbreaking moment. It was indeed a very difficult time for Octavian, who had to fight the system in order to retain his independence and custody of Roxanne. His mother had had life insurance, and that helped them pay off the house, but there wasn't much left over after that. Octavian applied for government assistance, got a job in fast food, and finally, sort of, learnt to cook. Meanwhile, Blanchard was continuing to move on with his dream bachelor life, living it up as summer came to Evergreen Harbour with a barrage of pool and cocktail parties. Having children with Greta was one of the biggest regrets of his life. But abandoning them to their fate wasn't. Blanchard may have technically been a father, but he wasn't a dad. Which is exactly what he told the next pair of people who came knocking at his door proclaiming that Blanchard was, or should be, a parent. Twin sisters Ruby and Rose Fournier had actually both slept with Blanchard in recent weeks, but luckily, only Ruby was pregnant with his child. Not that it made any difference to Blanchard, of course. That had been months ago now. Not that they had ever met or knew about each other, but Blanchard and Ruby's daughter, Monique, had actually been born the same week that Greta had passed away. And Monique's Aunt Rose, who was taking on the majority of the childcare whilst Ruby went back to work, had sent word to Blanchard that his daughter was both healthy and beautiful. Blanchard didn't respond to the card. Blanchard had far more important things to worry about than the trail of children he was beginning to leave behind him. Originally, he had had no troubles with his endless serial romantic escapades, but as time went on, Blanchard began to realize that it really was a small world after all. For didn't that waitress look awfully familiar? She absolutely was familiar. It was Julia Wright, a spirited university student Blanchard had rather briefly gone out with almost a year before. With Julia being the naive young woman that she was at the time, they'd only ever had that one date, and Blanchard hadn't spared her a second thought since then. He meant to apologise for that now. Slipping away from his date Thea Lynn on the pretense of having to go to the bathroom, Blanchard instead ducked into the kitchen to touch base with Julia quickly. Gosh, she looked beautiful. She was probably never going to believe or forgive him, but he really had lost her number. Blanchard was a charismatic, charming man with a silver tongue and strong, expensive cologne that had Julia smiling within seconds. Oh, she knew he was probably lying. He could have always found her on Social Bunny if he really liked her. But the fact that he'd ducked away from his date to pursue her had to mean something, right? What it meant was that Blanchard understood that Thea Lynn thought of herself as a savvy young lady from a good family, and although she may have agreed to go out with him, and that date had gone wonderfully, she wasn't the type of girl to go home with him when it was only their first date. Instead, Blanchard said a soft, sweet goodbye to Thea outside the restaurant and handed her safely into a taxi before heading back inside for Julia. Against her own better judgment, Julia once again took Blanchard back home to the small apartment she'd moved into since graduating university. She was struggling to find work in her chosen field and waitressing to make ends meet, and this was a low point in her life. And Blanchard didn't care about any of that, of course. He was just glad to have someone in his arms that night. And that brings us to the end of Chapter 5 of Blanchard the Bachelor. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can tune in soon to hear the next chapter. And hey, maybe think about sharing my channel with a friend. Or don't. It's your life. Anyway, bye!